we are talking about Microsoft Teams and Graph API. My name is Iva Bersat, and I'm a business application consultant. I'm focused on the Microsoft 365, Azure, Dynamics 365, Power Platform, and ServiceNow. I'm based in Lausanne, Switzerland, and I'm working for Sword Group. It's an international software company, and we are providing some IT services around the world. I'm Microsoft certified trainer since a long time now, and I'm focused on developer certification like SharePoint Framework, Team SDK, TypeScript, React, .NET Core, and all development-related stuffs. Basically, for this session, it will be just an introduction of Microsoft Graph at the beginning, and we are going through the Teamwork API, and I will show you what I've done for some of my customers with some examples. And the goal for today is like that. For the objective, so you will get an overview of Microsoft Graph API capabilities for the team service. You will understand what is the lifecycle management for Teams with Microsoft Graph API, and you will have just an overview of what I've done for some customer with some integration with Graph API and some Microsoft 365 products like SharePoint, Dynamics 365, or like this. So this is focused on how to make some integration with Graph API and Microsoft 365 products. Right. Perfect. So the agenda, I'm starting with just a quick recap of Microsoft Graph with some context and some available tools. And after, I'm going through the teamwork endpoints like team, group, channel, Teams tab, and so on. And I'm just talking about subscription at the end. And at the end, I'm checking all the questions you have in the chat or with if you want to speak with me, no problem. Perfect. That's the agenda for my session. I'm starting just a quick recap of what is Microsoft Graph and just to make some context. So Microsoft Graph is one of the core services in Microsoft 365. It's your gateway to the Microsoft 365 data. Because I'm using Microsoft Graph to extend the Microsoft 365 platform. So when I'm building some SharePoint framework extension, or when I'm building some .NET Core application, sometimes I need to interface me with Graph, and the Graph API is here to help for my extension integration. And this is one of the core services of Microsoft 365. And as you see in this this picture, I like you see Microsoft Graph is in the center because it's a core service. And when you want to integrate something with Microsoft 365 data, you need to go through Microsoft Graph. So just a quick technical recap about Microsoft Graph. So as I said before, it's a gateway to Microsoft 365 data, but you also have ATI, ATP, Azure AD, Intune, and Windows 10 data, and a lot of more because Microsoft is improving every day Microsoft Graph. So in the future, you will more and more endpoint to use. It's a RESTful API. And basically, it's like other API you have to work with in the past, in the future, because it's standard. Microsoft Graph is using all the standard for connecting, for authentication, for permission. So it's really nice. For the authentication, basically, if I have a user who want to connect to Microsoft Graph in a delegate context, but basically the user will get an authorization code for the authorized endpoint. Sorry, and after with this authorization code, he will get an access token for the token endpoint, and this token is a GWT, JSON Web Token, and you need to inject this access token in the HTTP request to authenticate the request. And when you have authenticated the request, you can access the data. For the permissions, you have two contexts. The delegated context, it's when you have a user connected. It's only when you have a user behind your application, he's connected, he can interact only in his scope. Remember this because he can't access the whole data. He can access the data only in his scope, because sometimes the user don't have access to the whole teams. He has just access to one or two teams, and this context is only in this scope, user scope. For the application context, it's like when you want to create an application or service, you use the application context and you have access, for example, to the whole data. Like if you want to access to the whole users data, so whole teams data, you need to have an application context. Basically, if you want to request data, you need to apply the less privilege principle, because the good practice is to always requesting the less permissive permissions. For example, you don't need to request the whole directory when you want just to create some teams. So basically, you are working with scopes. For example, team.create, if you want to create some teams, group.readwrite.all if you want just to manage group, update settings, create some groups, and so on. So basically, you are working with scopes and you are requesting to access data only in specific scopes. After, if you want to integrate some application or like that with Microsoft Graph, you need to register an Azure AD app just to get a client ID. And this client ID is the base setting for accessing Graph. This is your application identity, and you are registering this through Azure AD. And in Microsoft Graph, you have several endpoints, and an endpoint is an entry point to communicate with an API. In Graph, you have multiple endpoints like users, like teams, like as we are talking just after, but you have some endpoints available. And some endpoints are in beta, and some endpoints are globally available. And I'm not talking about endpoints in beta, because it can change. It's like beta, but I'm only focused on teamwork endpoints which are globally available. And for endpoint, you have the HTTP method, and the HTTP method is like an action you want to execute on a specific API resource. It's like get, post, put, delete, patch, and so on. So for example, when you are looking at the Microsoft documentation, you see like the action and the endpoint. So for example, you have get microsoft.com/v1/users to access the user's resource. This is a naming convention to see which action you want to execute on the endpoint. And for example, in a specific endpoint, you can use multiple methods like get, like put, like patch. If you want to update the user data, if you want to create a user, you will use some HTTP method, and you won't use multiple HTTP method on the same endpoint. And the last thing I want just to give you an overview is the service limitation is throttling. At the moment, it's 2,000 requests per second. And if you are going through this limit, you will have a 429 error. And it's like too many requests. And basically, when you are developing some application with Microsoft Graph, you are using some retry after header to retry the same query in some seconds, because Microsoft Graph has some security implementation to avoid like a big request or like this. So be careful when you want to integrate some of your application with Microsoft Graph, because you have a 2,000 requests per second limitation. I didn't get to this limit in the past, but I heard some people who go through this limit, and be careful of that, because when you want to create some big integration with Microsoft Graph data, this is a key point. Right. This was just a technical recap of Microsoft Graph, just an overview of which are the key points to understand. But now, just a quick overview of what I'm using for tools. You have the first tool is a Graph Explorer. It's an online tool. You can use without any account, and you get some mock data. It's just some test data. And if you are signing in with your account, you will get your tenant data. So for example, in this picture, you see I'm connected with my account in my developer tenant, and I can manage, for example, my globally available Teams endpoints, and you have also some example of Microsoft Teams beta endpoints. So basically, if you want to have an overview of what's available on Microsoft Graph related to Teams, you can just see what Microsoft provide you in Graph Explorer. You have tons of pre-made templates, and you can try this request for you. So basically, you can create also your own request. It's possible. And the second tool, I'm using mainly Postman. Maybe some of you know this tool. It's a really powerful tool for API management, API testing, and like this. But for Microsoft Graph, you have a template, and you can download this template from the Microsoft official site, and you can get a pre-made request to try, and it's really nice. And for me, I'm using also Postman for API testing because you can write JavaScript for example, to get some data, to put this data in another request. So basically, Postman is really an advanced tool if you want to create some advanced request for Microsoft Graph, when you want to make some filter and like this, because Postman has some really advanced capabilities. So I'm using always Postman, but if you want to just have an overview of what you can do with Graph, just use Graph Explorer because it's a really simple tool. But Postman has some advanced feature, and I'm using this always because I need sometimes to create some advanced query for some integration features. Right. There is also some other tools in the market, but mainly I have used Postman and Graph Explorer for my customer, or when I want to try something, or when I want to try some beta endpoints. Basically, I'm using Postman mainly right now. Perfect. So I want just to introduce the session, because today I'm talking only about the teamwork endpoints, and all these endpoints are related to the team's lifecycle management. And what is the team's lifecycle management? So basically, you create a team, and then you add members and owner. Then you configure team settings, because the settings will evolve in the team, because it's not fixed. So some people will update the settings during the life cycle. You will add some members or owners. So all these settings will evolve. And maybe you want to create some channels. After, you will install apps, maybe. And after installing apps, you add tabs. And with tabs, you can showcase contents from the apps, like Power BI report, like SharePoint library, and so on. And after, when you have achieved the team's lifecycle, you will archive or delete the team. Sometimes you won't delete or archive the team because you have some org-wide scope, because you want to keep these teams for life, because you have some department teams, you have some project teams we will live alive for forever. That's based on your business needs. So this is basically the team's lifecycle management, and this is I'm talking about today. So the first endpoint I'm talking for you today is a team resource type, and this endpoint is basically accessible for delegated or application context. Basically, this endpoint is here to manage your teams. Basically, you can make some teams creation. So create for me is a create, read, update, delete. So you can create teams, you can add members, remove members, you can add owners, and so on. You can archive, unarchive teams. You can duplicate and clone teams, because sometimes you want to create the same teams with the same parameter, but you just want to keep the settings or the member. And you can, as I will show you just after, you can specify the parts you want to clone. This is really interesting. And if you want, you can create teams for an existing Microsoft 365 group. It's possible. So this is what I'm doing every time. I'm creating a Microsoft 365 group before creating a team. And I'm using this endpoint to convert my Microsoft 365 group into a team. For the common properties, you have the display name, the ID. By default, when you are using this endpoint, the team will be always public by default. If you don't specify anything, it will be public. So be careful, because you don't want sometimes a public team, you want private team. So specify always the visibility of your team. After you have member settings, guest setting, you have a really useful property is archived, because sometimes you want to check if the team is archived before doing anything on this team. And the last well-known property is a web URL. It's just a deep link to access the team directly from your web browser or from the Teams client. It's a deep link. Right. So for example, just going for a concrete real life example, if you want to create a team, you are just using the Teams endpoint with post request. It's a JSON request, and in the body, you just create your team with the template you want to use, because right now in Teams service, you have some template. So in this example, I'm using a standard template. You are putting display name, description, and the member. And if you see, I'm always using a unique ID of the user to just be sure that the user is unique. Because sometimes if you are using other properties like email address or like this, it can be not unique. And I'm dealing always with unique ID to add my owners and users inside my teams, because I'm sure this is a unique object. So basically, if you are trying this request in the Graph Explorer or Postman, you are just creating a simple team. And in this case, as I told you before, I'm not specifying anything about the visibility. So if I'm going through Postman or Graph Explorer with this request, this team will be public by default, because I don't specify anything. So you will have a public team. If I want a private team, I had to add just another property in this request to have a private team. Second example, if you want to archive a team. So basically, you are just creating a request, and you are specifying your team ID. And you can, if you want, specify if you want to set the SharePoint Online site behind the team in read-only, only for members. Because you want that the owners will can update the team settings or like this, or making some change on the SharePoint site. So basically, you can make the SharePoint site read-only only for members. And be careful, because this endpoint and this specific request is available only in the delegated context. So you need to have a specific user behind. You can't create this with application context. So be careful. Because I had some problem with this, because I wanted to make some SharePoint site behind my teams read-only, and I wasn't in a delegated mode. So this was a problem. Third example, if you want to clone a team, something like when you want to clone just a team with specific parts. So basically, you are just specify a team ID in the endpoint, and you are calling the clone endpoint with a post request. And in this request, you see, you can put a display name, a description. You can manage the mail nickname, because for myself, sometimes I want to have the control of the mail nickname. So I want to put a specific mail nickname to have a naming convention or like this. And the most interesting part is the parts to clone. So you can specify if you want to clone apps, tabs, settings, channels, or member. One of the settings or every setting. So you can choose. If you want just the channels, you can specify only the channels. So this is really interesting when you are creating some like Power Apps for Teams governance or like this, or maybe in ServiceNow or in Dynamics 365 if you want to manage your team related to your project. It's possible to clone the teams with specific parts. So it's really useful. And in this request, you see, I'm specifying the visibility. So these teams will be private. And if you don't specify anything, your team will be public by default, as I told you before. So this was three example of how you deal with this endpoint. And now I will focus on some use case because in the session, I'm only talking about my use case, what I'm done with my customer. So the first use case is Dynamics 365 project operation. And for this customer, it was required to automatically create a team per new project with some condition. So basically, when a new project is created in Dynamics 365 project operation, I'm checking some condition like some project settings or some fields, and I'm creating automatically a new team. And in the night, we automatically synced the member and the owners with the project resources. So basically, all the teams are synced with the Dynamics 365 project operation resources. And for the archiving, the rule was just to take the project end date plus maybe 10 days and with some condition, and you have an automatically archiving process to manage the full life cycle. And this case was really good because you are creating automatically the team, you manage the owners and the members, and you are archiving automatically the teams. This was a good use case. I also made this use case with Dynamics 365 Finance and Operation, but in this case, it was just to sync the project owner and alternate as team owners. And basically, those two guys were inviting the people in these teams. For the archiving process, it was the same. We put the rule was to take the project end date plus just a 10 days retention policy. If someone wants just to put the project end date to you see in maybe to deplace to move the project end date in the future. So we are just adding some days to prevent any problem with that. And I've also done some other integration with Power Apps, Power Automate for Teams governance. I made some SPFX web part to manage the Teams lifecycle because some customers don't have any Dynamics 365 license or ServiceNow license or other things like this, or they just have SharePoint. So you can develop your web part and manage your Teams lifecycle with SharePoint framework. It's possible. And I've also made some ServiceNow integration because ServiceNow is really great if you want to integrate with Graph because you have REST message interface to create your Graph request, and it's really easy. And for all this use case, it's all about Teams lifecycle management, like Teams request, Teams lifecycle management to archive, to delete some teams automatically based on some condition. You can manage member and owners and so on. So this is use case I'm done in the past, and I'm also working at the moment on some of this case with Graph. It's really great because Microsoft Graph is evolving really fast, and every month you have new endpoints available to manage some business case. So it's really great. Microsoft is really fast in Microsoft about Microsoft Graph. So it's really cool. So then we have the group resource type, and this group resource type isn't really related to Microsoft Teams, but you will see it's really interesting stuff because this endpoint is like other endpoint. You have groups and you provide the ID. And if you want to access the object in the group, you can specify in the endpoint request. It's available delegated in application context. The command method are like Teams endpoint. It's like create, read, update, delete groups on the member and owners. You can manage the assigned licenses. If you want to assign specific licenses to this group, it's possible. You can manage app roles if you want. For those who you don't know, you can use open extension in this endpoint. It's basically custom data. You can add on a specific object, just a custom data. For example, I've used this open extension to provide a business description of the group to integrate with some business app. So custom development, and you can provide your data inside a specific object. So it's really useful. I've used this open extension to manage in the user endpoint to manage the cross-device settings, because with Graph sometimes you want to have some cross-device settings like with SharePoint Framework or Teams SDK when you are developing for Teams, and you can manage the user settings cross-device. So when the user has changed his device and is connecting on the app in Teams, you have the settings back because of the open extension, and you are checking the settings. So basically, it's really useful. So if you want to integrate some user setting cross-device, you consider the open extension. It's really useful. And when I'm using something, I'm using the create teams from existing groups. You also have this method in the Teams endpoint, but you also have this in the group endpoint. And when I'm creating a new team, I'm creating a Microsoft 365 group before, and after I'm commenting this group inside to a Microsoft Teams team. The common properties are like the teams, you have display name, visibility. You can check the Azure Information Protection labels if you want. It's read-only, but you can check for the labels. You can check the group types, but by default, a Microsoft 365 group is unified. And you will see dynamic membership if you have dynamic membership activate for your group. So basically, you are creating some requests to add automatically your users inside the group. You can check if you have the mail feature enabled, the security group enabled, the mail nickname, and the extension if you want to check for custom data. Basically, it's a JSON data. So I really like this open extension because for my customer, I've used this a lot of time for user settings, for business description of the groups or the teams. It's really nice. For just a quick example, if you want to create a group, you are using the groups endpoint. It's like the Teams endpoint. You are providing a description, display name. You see group types is unified for a new Microsoft 365 group. You can manage if you want to enable the mail feature, mail nickname, if you want to check for the mail nickname. I'm always checking the mail nickname because I like to manage a naming convention for this property. You can check if you want to enable the security feature, and basically if you are executing this request, it's really simple. For creating a new team based on a Microsoft 365 group, you have to use the team endpoint, the team feature. Basically, you are using the groups endpoint, you are providing the ID of the team and just /team, and you are providing some team settings, for example, member setting, messaging setting, and fund settings. If you want to check the Microsoft certification, be careful because it's put, you see? This is a question in the certification. So be careful, it's put. It's put on the groups endpoint and not a post or like this. So this is a question in the certification. So you are just getting some points. It's put. Remember this. And if you want to add some users or some members in, mass adding members, you are just using the groups endpoint with patch, and you can add multiple members in the teams. I'm using this when I want to create big team with a lot of people. So basically, I'm creating a request with multiple object ID. It's directory object ID, and you are just getting the user unique ID from the Azure AD directory, and you are putting this in the member table in this request. For your use case of this group endpoint, basically is just to create a new team for an existing Microsoft 365 group. And you are using the group endpoint when the team endpoint capabilities are not enough, because sometimes you want to interact with advanced set properties like the open extension, the preferred data location when you have multi-geo available on a tenant, the mail nickname, the assigned label for Azure Information Protection, and so on. So I'm using the group endpoint when I want to interact. So I want to interact with the advanced properties. For the channel, it's like the team endpoint. It's available in delegated and application context. You can create some channel. You can add some members in the channel if the channel is in private mode. You can create some tabs. The properties are like every endpoint. You have the display name, the ID, the email. If you have set up the email feature for your channel, you can send message to a specific email address. And when you are sending an email to this address, this will be posted in the channel. But be careful, it's read-only mode. So you have to set in the Teams user interface your email, and after you can use this, but it's a read-only mode property. You can check the membership type, and you have also the web URL to access the channel from your web browser or Teams client directly. For every endpoint, it's like this. You see, you just make a post request to the Teams endpoint. You are specifying display name, description, and membership type because it's the standard channel. If you want, you can create a private channel and you can specify members to add. It's like this. For me, it's like the use case I've told before. I've done a lot of integration with financial operation because sometimes it's like when people have a lot of Microsoft product, it's really easy. In this case, it was just to create some public channel in the team for sub project. For example, a financial operation sub project, and we delete the channel when you have the sub project, and based on the sub project end date, I'm adding some days, and I'm deleting the channel. I've made a lot of integration with that, with Power Apps, Power Automate, SharePoint framework like this to manage the new channel request with or without approvals like this. The channel lifecycle management, it's always like Teams management lifecycle. For the Teams tab, it's like the same. So always delegated application context available. You have the create tabs. So basically, you can add tabs in your team. So basically, you can add website, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Power BI, like this. But some tab types don't support the graph configuration. So the workaround is just to use a website tabs. So website tab is available for SSO. So basically, you can integrate every Microsoft 365 product inside a website tab. So for me, I'm just using website tabs. I'm putting some wiki page, planner integration, stream video, forms, and like this. So basically, if you don't want to be restricted with direct configuration for Graph API, just use a website tab in your request, and you are done. Basically, the common properties are display name, ID, web URL, and you have all the configuration stuffs. For example, the Teams tab. In this case, I'm just creating a Power BI report tab. But be careful, this Power BI tab isn't configured. So basically, as I told you just before, the Power BI tab don't accept any configuration. So you are creating just a tab, and after this is the user to configure it. So basically, it's sometimes really not a great experience. So basically, you are using website tab, and it's working well. So basically, for example, this is a website tab. So for example, in this case, I'm just creating a website tab with a content URL with my website. But you can, if you want to use a SharePoint library, SharePoint URL, Power BI report, you can. Website tab is really great for SSO like Microsoft 365 services. So feel free to use SharePoint inside the website tabs. It's working well. For in my case, when I want just to create some tabs for Power BI report, SharePoint library list or file list, just use a website tab. It's really great. For example, this use case, I have done some Teams tab inventory, like extracting some all the Teams tab inside the whole organization. Sometimes I've done some tab request with or without approvals inside the company. You can have the mass tab creation, the mass tab deletion. You can do all the stuff related to Teams tab. Teams app resource type, this endpoint is available only in delegated mode. So basically, this endpoint is for create, read, update, delete app catalog. So this is related to app catalog. So basically, this is for when you want to make some updates on your application, you want to approve or reject some application in the catalog. Basically, the common properties are display name, ID, version of the app, and you have interesting property, the distribution method. Basically, when you have one, it's a whole tenant is from the store. The two is for the current tenant, so it's an organization. And the three is when some people have sideloaded the app in a user or team context. For example, I can check all the Teams app in the catalog. Basically, you are creating a GET request on the Teams app endpoint, and you are getting just a single table with the ID, external ID, name, version, distribution method. You see in this example, I have my test app, and the distribution method is organization-wide. Basically, if you want, you can upload automatically your Teams app package. And basically, you are just creating a request and you are managing the upload of your app package directly in the endpoint. So it's possible. For example, a really great use case I've done with this, I've developed for a customer a custom Teams app with Teams SDK, TypeScript, and Node.js stack. And basically, in this case, we made a build pipeline in Microsoft hosted agent, and we create a PowerShell action to generate and deploy automatically new version of Team app package. So basically, when we have some major update on the app for Azure DevOps, automatically we update the app package and we are notifying the users that, okay, an update on the Teams app has been made, so you can test it. So we create a whole lifecycle in Azure DevOps for Teams app development. And this use case was made with just a username and password, because this endpoint is available only in a delegated context. So delegated context is only in a user context, so you need to provide a username and your password. So this is terrible because I'm looking for the application context and it wasn't possible. So I hope Microsoft will update this to have application context, because you are dealing with a user credential in this case, but it's working and it's working well, because when we are developing Teams app sometimes, and it was a big Teams app, business application app related to some Azure integration and like this, and it was really quick to implement this. And we managed the whole lifecycle about this app. And it was really, really useful to use Graph API for that. Now we have the Teams app installation. So basically you can check the installed app for a user or a Teams. It's available delegated in application context. The common methods are like all the endpoint. You can create, read, update, delete the Teams coded app or the personal coded app. Basically, the only attribute is ID. Because in this case, when you are creating a request, you are just getting the app ID. And if you want to make the join with the app catalog, you can. And in this case, you see, you have the expand attribute in the request. And I'm just creating a join request to the Teams app definition. So in this case, I'm getting the whole properties of my app in one request using the expand filter. And basically, this was really useful to make some Teams install app inventory, because some customer asked me, okay, I want just to have an inventory of all the install apps inside the organization, because they don't manage any governance in the past, and now they just want to have a whole report of the Teams installed in the whole company. And if you want to make a mass install or install apps in the organization or like this, some customers will ask me to install some application in the organization. So you are using this endpoint to manage this kind of request. Now, chat message, it's like just to manage a chat message inside Teams, inside a one-to-one chat, inside a Azure chat. It's available delegated in an application. Basically, you can create, read, update, delete, chat message, channel message, individual message, specific. You can, if you want to get the delta messages in a specific channel, you can. If you want to see the new messages in a specific channel, you can. Basically, the common properties are like the other endpoint. You have the ID subject, chat ID, importance, from, and so on. Basically, for example, if you want to get the messages from a specific channel, you are specifying in just the channel ID, and you get, for example, in this case, just a structure, and you see you have the user ID, user display name, identity, and the channel identity. In this example, it's just one entry, because when you have multiple messages, you will have multiple structure and multiple data entry in this response. So basically, my use case in this endpoint was just to manage some harassment. In sometimes some customer wanted to monitor the harassment through sometimes security third-party tools. They want to integrate the chat message data inside third-party tools. So it's possible to redirect those data inside third-party tools. Or for example, in some case, if the purpose was internal logging, or if they want to extract some graph data to put this in a data lake or like this, it was the good way with this endpoint. The call resource type is a specific resource type and endpoint because it's available only in application mode. And in this endpoint, it's like all call operation, like call handling and so on. Basically, this endpoint is when you want to create some bots, like Azure Bot Framework or like this, and you can manage the call handling or like this. So this endpoint is really related to bots, bot process creation. And basically, you have a group call operation. You can check the recording status. You can get the quality reporting data if you want. And basically, the properties are like you have the ID of the call, the direction, the source, call route, back the UAE, and so on. Basically, this endpoint is focused on bots development. Like as I told, because this call endpoint is basically focused on call operation monitoring, like harassment. I will just showcase you a use case with subscription and Azure Logic app for harassment. But you can use this call resource for security purpose or quality purpose. If you want to get the quality data, it's possible. Basically, if you want to use AI and Azure Bot Framework or other specific Azure resources with the call endpoint, you can, because it's really related to call operations and with bot framework, AI, and other things like this. Now, activity feed notification is a brand new one because Microsoft Graph provides you the capability to create some feed notification right now. And you have a scope because you can create some notification in the chat scope, user scope, team scope. It's available in delegated and application context. And in this case, it's just to send user, team, or comment session scoped activity notification. You see in the menu, you have activity feed, and you can send activity feed notification. And when you click on this notification, you are getting to the target object. It's like chat, app, or team if you want. So you can manage this link. It's a deep link inside Microsoft Teams service. The common properties are like topic, you have the preview text, recipient, it's Azure AD user, activity type, and template parameter. All these properties are managed in the Teams app manifest. And the Teams app manifest is a file when you are creating an app package. And in this endpoint is really useful when you are creating and developing a Teams app. So basically, this is an example of a request. When you are creating a Teams app, you are just creating a post request, and you can send, for example, in this case, it was a finance approval request. I have a template. In the app manifest, I've made a template, and you can send a specific notification based on the template declared in the app manifest. So this is basically when you want to develop app in Teams with Teams SDK or SharePoint Framework, and you want to deal with the activity feed notification, you are using Graph API and this endpoint. It's really useful. So as I said, it's just to send app or service notification in a specific team scope. And all these templates of a notification are declared in the app manifest. And the app manifest is a part of a Teams app package with the two icons. Just a quick overview of the subscription, because it's a new feature in Graph. Basically, the Teams resource type supported in subscription is call, record, and chat message, individual, channel, or organization. Basically, subscription is to get notification when you have an event, like when the data are changing, or when you are creating a specific resource inside a specific endpoint. So you are getting notification, and the brand new feature is you can include the data directly in the notification. But be careful. When you want to include the data, you have just two things to manage. The token validation, because Microsoft Graph is giving you a token, and you need to validate this token to be sure that the origin is trusted. And you have the data decryption with key, because by default, by design, the data are encrypted. So you need to decrypt the data. For example, if you want to create a subscription on the Teams organization-wide messages, so in this case, for example, I'm creating a subscription to get all messages in my organization. It's possible to have an overview of all the messages inside your organization. So in this case, I'm redirecting the notification inside an Azure function. And you see, you have expiration date time, because subscription are not are limited in the time, because you will see you have some limit of the time. In this case, I'm just creating a subscription for getting the messages, and all the messages data will be sent to my Azure function. And this is a property notification URL. You see webhook.azurewebsite.net and what is my Azure function. So basically, this is what a notification look like, but you don't see the encrypted data. You have the subscription ID. You see you have the expiration date time, because every subscription has an expiration date time. You can see the resource and the resource data. In this case, it's not encrypted. This is just an example of graph message. But when you get in production mode, the notification, you will have encrypted data. And this is what we call callbacks. For example, the lifetime of the subscription, you have the expiration date time property. Basically, for all the resources, it's a little bit less than 3 days, except the security alert. It's like more than 3 days, and the team chat message, it's only 60 minutes. So basically, every subscription for getting notification on the graph data, you will have an expiration date time. And if you want to renew this date time, it's possible. You just renew the time, and you have 3 days more, or just a standard lifetime added. I forgot just my example of subscription, because in the past, you see, I'm just getting back to this for this example. Sorry. Yeah, this one. In the call resource type and endpoint, you see, you need to provide a call ID. And one of my customers wanted to get all the call record inside his organization, but it's not possible because you don't have the call ID. So basically, how to do that? How to get all the call records inside my company without using the communication API? So basically, you are using the subscription endpoint. So basically, you are creating a subscription to the calls endpoint. It's possible, it's available, and you are getting all the call record in an Azure function, and the Azure function just get the data, make some cleaning, and put this in a data lake. And this is how I achieve this request, because my customer wanted to have an overview of all the call record for harassment purpose or like this. They want to make some analysis on the calls. And basically, with the call endpoint, it's not possible, but with the subscription, it's possible. So basically, you are just redirecting the notification to another function, and the Azure function is creating some record in the data lake or a database. It was the way I achieved this request. So I'm done. I'm sorry because there is no demonstration or showcase in this session, because it's just to provide you an overview of what is possible inside Microsoft Graph and Teams. But basically, with that, you can have an overview of what you can do, what you can do, what are my problems in the past, and I guess you learned a little bit more about what is teamwork endpoints for the lifecycle management of team service. So if you have any question or or if you want to ask some business case in your company, or if you want to talk, feel free. I will check the chat right now, and if you have any question, feel free to ask right now. Thank you very much for having me.
Hi, Yves. Thank you for that session. There is a question by Samit, who's asking how to generate this user's GUID, any tool required, or from existing user ID. I think that was from you when you were demonstrating the API.
Well, it was maybe to create a team. It was, yeah, this one.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was the question? Sorry.
So the question is how to generate the user's GUID.
Oh, you don't generate this because it's always existing users. So basically, when you want to create a team with some user and add the user in as owner or member, you need to make some multiple requests to get the user ID, because sometimes you are getting the email address of the user, but you need to create some additional request before creating the teams, because sometimes, for example, when you have a Power Apps or a ServiceNow request, you are just getting the email address of the user. So you are making just a simple request to get the user ID, and after this, you have all the data for creating the teams. So I don't generate this user ID. It's just existing unique ID in my Azure ID directory.
Thank you for that. Okay, there's lots of great feedback. Coquelin, Samit saying thanks, great session. So Yves, could you please share your contact details so that the community can keep in touch with you, please?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, this is, if you want, this is, sorry. Yeah, this is my contact data. I will share in the chat before, but feel free if you have any question, because I've done this session in French 1 or 2 months before, and feel free to ask if you have any problems in the integrating Microsoft Graph and Teams. I'm always be here for you if you have any questions. So feel free to ask. I'm always answering any kind of request in my social network and website. So feel free to ask.
That's great. That's really helpful, Yves. Okay. Well, thanks again, Yves, for that session.
Thank you.
Really
Thank you
great.
for having me.
Thank you. I hope to see you soon.
Yeah, see you soon, and thanks everybody for joining. It was a great experience for me.
Oui. Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Thank you
That's
very
it.
much.
Thank
you.
you.